Welcome to the Zealous Podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder. This week I've got Meaghan Flaherty in the house with me, an athletic trainer with the Philadelphia Phillies organization. I'm going to talk all about getting ready for spring training. Meanwhile, we've got some upcoming CEU workshops on the East Coast and West Coast. They have been approved for physical therapists and for trainers. Implementing foot wedges into exercise programs for improved performance will be at Physio X January 27th and 28th in Needham, Mass, and February 3rd and 4th at RFC in Capitola, California. You can go online at rockysnyder.com to find out more information and register. Meanwhile, follow us on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder. Click the subscribe button and enjoy the conversation. Well, Meaghan Flaherty is in the house with me down in Clearwater, Florida, gearing up for spring training in a few weeks at least, if not a couple months, but it's coming around the corner. She's with the Philadelphia Phillies, but we've got some things in common, like we're both UMass Amherst alum and grew up around the Boston area, me up in the north, her in the south. Of course, they were different eras, but we won't get into that. But Meaghan, first, welcome to Zealous.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
It is a pleasure. Now, you're athletic trainer for, what's your official title with the Phillies?
Yeah, I'm a minor league athletic trainer within the Philadelphia Phillies organization. This year I'll be in AA Reading, Pennsylvania, the Reading Fighting Phils.
So which means you work your ass off compared to the athletic trainers above you.
I think we all work hard in different ways. There's definitely different intricacies from the minor leagues comparatively to the major leagues, mostly the amount of staff. But I think everyone works hard in their own way. Each level, I've been joking around with all my coworkers this camp that I'm crossing off my minor league bingo card this year. After this year, I'll have been to all of our affiliates at some point in my career, which is actually quite interesting. But yeah, obviously I can kind of speak to how all the different levels are in some capacity, having at least a year kind of everywhere at this point.
Yeah, what's on your bingo card? What are the affiliates? Give me an idea.
So I actually got hired by the Phillies back at the end of 2019, coming off my intern year with the Cubs. I got hired to be a rookie ball athletic trainer, FCL was what it was called back then, the Florida Coast League. Florida Complex League, I think, or
Complex,
Gulf
yes.
League. I think they've changed the league name since then. And in that year, there was a DR complex job open as well as the rookie level job. And I basically was applying for both and was hoping to have an impact in the organization wherever they saw me being the best fit. So ended up being hired for rookie ball that year. Showed up to spring training, got about 2 months in, and then COVID shut down the whole thing. So that was a pretty interesting year. We kind of met as a medical staff, kind of as it was going. We all kind of anticipated going home for about 2 weeks and then reconvening and having a normal year. That obviously did not happen at the minor league level in any capacity. So I was in Clearwater. I was supposed to be in rookie ball. So I had an apartment that the Phillies were kind of helping me with, and there were some opportunities for me to stay. And I decided, it sounds better than going home to freezing cold Boston, staying in Clearwater and working.
That's a wise choice.
Yeah, and it was a great opportunity, obviously being my first year, so kind of opened up to a plethora of opportunities there.
Such as what? What opened up for you while you were there?
So we kind of, obviously there was a time where there was no baseball activity going on down here, and then we had some 40-man players that were still kind of in the Florida area, players from the DR, players from California, kind of from all over that just weren't willing to go home yet because they weren't sure what the next move was. They wanted to stay ready just in case the season kind of continued to progress. So I ended up covering some of their bullpens and things like that. It was mostly pitchers, a couple catchers, and kind of helping them cover those things for our major league staff. Some of them went home to like their families up north or wherever they were from. So a couple of us stayed down here and kind of rotated that. There was a group of about 35 Venezuelan minor league players that couldn't return to Venezuela because the border was closed. So we had about 35 of them here in Clearwater. So once the 40-man guys kind of went up to spring training 2.0, kind of end of June, early July, I kind of transitioned over to that. And we basically ran like a camp mostly for the whole summer into the fall for all the Venezuelan players that couldn't go home. So we were practicing, hitting BP, throwing, kind of gearing up because there really was no direction probably until that July time when the major leagues went back.
Boy, that must have been a deep, deep learning process.
It was kind of a really good way to start. It was my
Yeah.
first year being on my own, and there was a couple of us minor league athletic trainers. There was three of us that started like first year full time. Me, Sam Myers, and Raul Perez. He had interned with the Phillies the year before, but came on full time the same year. So kind of all three of us were kind of circulating those responsibilities. And it was the year I learned Spanish. So I had a little bit of Spanish. I took Spanish in high school and kind of in middle school too. Not really seriously. I had some vocab. I could conjugate some verbs, but it was kind of an eye-opening experience when I showed up to Cubs minor league spring, last clinical of grad school, and my job was EKG stickers. So I was putting EKG pads on players so that they could get EKGs done. I remember looking at a player and asking him, "Hey, like roll this up, put this here, so I can put a sticker, or whatever." And the player's staring me blank at my face. I was like, "Okay, let me try again." I say it in English, and one of the players looks at me. He's like, "He doesn't understand you," and I was like, "Oh, okay, I'm understanding. I'm getting it. I'm here." So that was kind of eye-opening. Like, wow, first day hits you right between the eyes. Like, you have a lot to learn. So that was kind of my intro to pro ball itself. So kind of took it seriously my intern year with the Cubs, learning more vocab, and then I was able to work with basically all Spanish speakers for 4 or 5 months, and it really gave me an opportunity to learn with kind of low stakes. So that's kind of how I spent that year growing as an athletic trainer.
Spanish immersion class in professional baseball. I love it. Maybe there's something there. Maybe there's some type of course that's you're going to develop that. Speaking of courses, so we're going to turn back the time for a second there because I want to delve deeper into what you've been doing with the Phillies and how you got there and your time with the Cubs, perhaps a bit. We got to talk about UMass. Like when I went, okay, so this was a while ago. This was maybe honestly 10 years after Animal House came out, or maybe even, which was what, our illustrious university area in Amherst was based upon. That movie, that's what it was based upon. So there was lingering effects, shall we say. Academics were not the highest priority when going to school there, but somehow that changed since I left. It was probably because I left that everything, they said, okay, we got to get more serious now. The University of Massachusetts Amherst is now one of the flagship universities in the whole Northeast when it comes to so many different departments, including yours. So where did you stay on campus? Just because I want to reminisce, but what was it like? What was the programs like at the university?
Yeah, coming out of high school, my dad actually didn't want me to apply to UMass. He kind of, in the
You knew
same
better.
breath, didn't think it was necessarily the best academic school that I could choose. I ended up taking him on a tour. Kind of, we went over the finances and stuff. He's like, "Okay, if this is a state school, like after seeing the campus, he's like, okay, you can apply here." So I applied there. I actually went in as a pre-med student. I was going to probably select biology to be my major. I lived in Southwest both my freshman and my sophomore year. Never in one of the
So we
towers.
should pause right there. We should pause for the listening audience to understand Southwest. So I'm going to take us back in history a little bit. Speaking of baseball, in 1986, the World Series was the Boston Red Sox against the New York Mets, and the Red Sox lost. It was still the curse of the Bambino, and it was painful. But I was living off campus at the time with some pals, and we were jumping up and down on Game 6 because we were gonna just skip school and go into Government Center to the parade and everything. This was great. And then, of course, a ball trickled through a player whose name will remain unknown right now, by first base, and everything just crumbled. The Mets actually end up winning Game 7, and it is that time where in Southwest, where you were living, where pizza delivery cars were being flipped upside down, couches were being thrown out the window at Mets fans that were parading and celebrating in the common quads of these high towers, 21-story, just dormitory high skyscrapers. So when you say Southwest, it kind of draws a warm, fuzzy feeling to me. But that's probably not how it was with you, right? Southwest,
Yeah,
it was densely populated, though.
yeah. I think it's the second most densely populated area, secondary to Manhattan, like New York, New York, for
Yes.
like square footage and how
Per
many people.
square foot, exactly.
Yeah,
We
it's
almost
something
had
like
Hong Kong.
there's a strange statistic there that they
Yeah.
rattle off when you tour the school. But yeah, I end up choosing Southwest. Yeah, never lived in a tower. But getting into UMass was a lot more difficult than I think it had previously been. The academics were they continue to be, it's pretty difficult school to get into.
It is now.
Having some
Yeah. They
cousins
said
that
we don't want guys like that anymore. We've got to filter them a little bit better. And now you've got the creme de la creme like yourself graduating there. You go for your degree there. You get your undergraduate in athletic training, kinesiology, exercise science. What was it?
kinesiology. Yep. I ended up sitting through one biology class. And one thing about me is I'm a pretty straight shooter. And I think I sat through that class and realized, Megs, you're probably not going to be a doctor, but let's find something that you really are passionate about. And I had 2 surgeries on my elbow when I was playing sports when I was in middle school, and ended up loving kind of my orthopedic surgeon and my PT that I worked with. Shout out Travis. He was amazing, and kind of thought, okay, if I'm not going to be a doctor, then maybe I would do something sports medicine related. And so kinesiology was kind of a sure shot for me from there. So, yep, ended up getting an internship with the football team my sophomore year, my sophomore year, and was working with one of the first female athletic trainers in NCAA Division I football, Jen Broder. She still works for UMass, not in the same capacity from what I understand, but she was absolutely incredible, and kind of got to see athletic training firsthand. And in grad school, I always joke that I kind of had a cheat code because I was an informal athletic training student as a kin student there.
That's great. And then you go on, you get your master's in athletic training in Bridgewater. How did you connect with the Cubs?
Yeah, so basically 10 days after I graduated undergrad, I enrolled at Bridgewater State and I started my master's degree.
10
The
days?
10 days, that's all I had. So I think I spent 3 days after graduation in my college house and sadly moved home, and then started my classes at Bridgewater basically in the summer.
Oh, where did you live off campus at UMass? Because you're like 2 years in Southwest, and then they
Yep,
basically kick you out, right?
I lived in Hadley on Rocky Hill Road, kind of behind the football stadium, my junior year. And then senior year, we lived in a house on Railroad Street. It was kind of by Amherst College, close to like the
Oh,
VFW Main Street.
all right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was out in Sunderland,
Yeah.
Cliffside Apartments, way the heck out there, but it was good. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Pioneer Valley, good
yeah,
times.
Pioneer Valley.
But
So
then,
yeah,
but Bridgewater and the Cubs, tell me about that.
yeah. So I always thought I wanted to do football, kind of going into Bridgewater after working with Jen. I was like, okay, great. I'm going to push football either at the professional level or a Division I level. So kind of went in there. In my first rotation, they put me at a high school. It was Tabor Academy. I don't know if you're familiar with Tabor Academy. It's a boarding school in southeastern Massachusetts. It's in Marion, not quite on the Cape, but
Yeah.
kind of in that general
Okay.
area going towards the bridge. So ended up there, did a rotation there, kind of get my high school out of the way, and I ended up liking it a little bit more than I thought I would. And I never really imagined myself working high school, but this was where a lot of the students boarded, and it was kind of higher level athletics with more resources. So it was like as college of a high school as I could get. And basically my goal there was just to not work with football players. So I worked with every other sport that they had. So they had rowing, they had soccer, different, like all the way up from freshmen, different, like probably 5 teams there. Field hockey, all that kind of jazz. So I kind of tried to diversify my skill set a little bit there. They also had 3 athletic trainers working there, 2 full-time, 1 part-time. So kind of a couple different minds to pick there as well. Ended
Sure.
up going to Harvard for spring football. That was my spring football rotation with Brank Burksetter. So ended up there in spring, and ended up getting asked to come back for the fall and work football again. So in that summer, I kind of decided to pursue a internship in the Cape Cod Baseball League to get better at upper extremity injuries. I never wanted to pursue baseball, actually. I just wanted to become a more well-rounded clinician as a student. So applied for that, given that my geographical location kind of made sense there, and got accepted, got given a host family, like had the whole full 9 collegiate baseball summer league experience, and ended up loving baseball. So
Oh,
going to the fall at Harvard, I worked with a baseball athletic trainer. He was basically like 80% baseball, 20% football from kind of what I understood. His main sport was baseball. I think he also had sailing as well, just kind of an extra sport that kind of worked with his schedule. And then football, he did the games and basically worked like with the long-term rehabs during practice. So Jordan Knight, he was incredible. I worked with him. He actually did his GA at Auburn, and kind of gave me some inside scoop of like kind of what pro ball might be. And the Cape Cod League was also a little bit of a taste there. So I started bugging my clinical coordinator. We had a connection with the Cubs that we hadn't sent a student in probably 3 years. But I started bugging her like, hey, is this something that I could do? could you put me in contact with somebody? And she reached out to Chuck Bauman, who is one of the athletic trainers in the big leagues with the Cubs now. And I ended up going out for my last rotation, moved 3,000 miles away from my family to a place I'd never been with nobody that I knew, thinking that it would just be my last rotation. And then maybe I would pursue something like Jordan's job where I would do football or baseball or both or something. Try to make myself more marketable, learn as much as I could from all the different people with the Cubs. And I'd say about day 3, I realized I'm probably never going to leave. Pro ball is kind of like took my attention. And so after I finished my clinical there, I'd passed my VOC. They hired me on as an intern to finish the rest of the year. So I ended up spending 10 months in Arizona.
Okay, so I find that kind of curious or somewhat fascinating because the extreme differences between football and baseball, put aside George Carlin's stand-up routine, which is funny as hell if you ever listen to the differences between football and baseball with him. But I'm curious from an athletic trainer's perspective, what is it? What was it that you were so geared toward going to football and lo and behold, you discover your passion for baseball? What was it?
So I kind of had always been around the game of baseball. My dad coached, my brother played. There's like a room in my house that I always tell people about, that the banisters leading up to it are wooden baseball bats. Like my dad is baseball obsessed. I joke with people that I don't know who's more excited that I work at baseball, me or my father, and he'll take any opportunity to come see a baseball game anywhere I'm at. He's having a great time following me around. But basically that internship with the Cape kind of showed me I had figured at that point, like, you don't see what you see in football, right? Athletic trainers running on with the team positions, like something significant's going on, this person needs to come off, they need to be evaluated, kind of that more like acute stuff. So I remember thinking, what is baseball sports medicine if that doesn't happen, right? Like, what does it even look like? And I had a hard time wrapping my head around it. After the Cape League, I kind of realized that baseball, what should be next to baseball in the dictionary, is just tendinopathy, right? So these guys are in some way, shape, or form dealing with something all year, and the art is to keep them healthy anyways, right? To keep them out there for as many games as you can safely. So I think the difference between football and baseball is, like, maybe you don't see those like big, huge, gruesome injuries where these guys are tearing up their knees and popping their Achilles every other week. You're seeing a lot more of the greater injuries over a greater period of time. So trying to keep guys healthy over 130 games. I actually had an intern this year that came to us from the Packers. Our associate Tori, she's great. She's working with Utah football now. And I asked her about 3 weeks into her internship, hey, like, how you liking it? Like, what's the biggest difference that you're seeing? And she goes, I'm still getting used to practicing and playing on the same day. So thinking about coming in and doing your routines, right? BP, throwing program, throwing bullpens, all of that, taking infield, and then playing at night. She's like, when we practice, we didn't play. And they played 1 game a week. So kind of that, like, trying to get geared up for a game every single night and realizing the difference there, that they have 10 maybe a season, 12 a season, and we're playing 133. So that's the biggest difference too, right? The number of games and the volume of workload.
Yes. So how do you mitigate? I mean, obviously, if you'd had the answers to all this, you wouldn't be talking to me right now, and everybody would be coming to you on a mountaintop. But necessarily, like, what are the approaches? What are the strategies that the Phillies, like yourself, and without giving any kind of trade secrets away, that you're trying to mitigate the tendinopathy, the overuse? Obviously, reducing volume could be a key indicator there, but are there other tools that you're using like that stand out for you?
Yeah, I think we do a really good job of integrating with other departments. I think the Phillies do it, I'm biased, better than anybody else. But I think we do a really great job. I think basically the best way that I was able to mitigate a lot of those like season ending type injuries was managing acute to chronic workload ratios. So we're still kind of improving in these and like how we get our data and what tools we can kind of use to monitor these things. But essentially the spikes in workload are where you kind of get in trouble, right? So we're thinking about, like you mentioned, pitch count earlier, right? If you're thinking about somebody over a course of a 7-day cycle or a 28-day cycle, how does their workload today or this week compare to the past month? So is it double? Is it only 10% greater from day to day or from this start to the last start? I think when you start to get into those for like large spikes in workload over a short period of time is when you're going to kind of get in those danger zones, at least from my experience. I know for us, like a big part of our philosophy and is me and my strength coach from this past year, Mark Jesse, we joke around that strong things don't break, which is only half true, right? Like you can't prevent everything, but if you have some level of strength to start, then you're already in a better spot. So really promoting that these guys are loading their cuffs consistently. And I think there's obviously like chronic workload type things that go along with that, as well as acute, and learning how to dose that out is definitely a skill that you kind of acquire over the course of a year.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. But it doesn't end at the cuff, right? It's how do we transfer force from the ground up and from the top down? So are there strategies that you and your crew are using that you feel are better than other approaches, whether it's screening assessments or whatnot? Like you mentioned that you're biased in your opinion, but you feel like collaboratively your whole team has a pretty darn good recipe for success. What is it about that makes it so?
Yeah, I think using like as much objective data as you can to create checkpoints throughout either a week or a month, or kind of how often you're doing it depends on what you're kind of looking for or hoping to achieve. But we utilize different things like the force plates, a lot of the valve technology, Nord boards, things like that, as well as like we monitor grip strength throughout the year for our pitchers. So essentially just trying to like see how, if there's differences from left to right, if there's differences from this week to last week, is there peak power going down, things like that. So using as much objective data as you can throughout the course of your season to kind of monitor like fatigue levels, right, on some of these players as the year goes on. And then that can kind of manipulate your usage decisions for the players in the weeks to come.
What's the acceptable range of deviation or asymmetry between left and right grip strength?
So, I mean, I think there isn't necessarily a from left to right, as I would say, as more as your trends. So if you're somewhere, we have guys that throw 100 that their grip strength is 98, right? When we're hoping that it's somewhere closer to maybe 150, 180, 200, right? We have guys 200 plus. So I think it's more so how you deviate from your norm as opposed to a difference from left to right, because pitchers are
grip strength being 200 pounds of force.
Some players, some pitchers.
Are you crazy? That's really
freak athletes. Yeah. I had a pitcher this year that's like 223. It was like
sincerely
whipping it out. Yeah, every time. So then with him, right, if he's dipping below 212, like anywhere closer to 200, then I'm like, okay, like where's his fatigue at? Let me check in with this player. Where can we kind of go from there? So I don't think there's necessarily a left or right like ratio that I'm looking for. It's more so how do they deviate from normal, right? So there's guys that are abnormally weak that it doesn't necessarily translate to their cuff strength or their Nord board or their peak performance or their velo on the field. It's just more so that they aren't able to translate that force as well as somebody else. So it doesn't necessarily mean left to right.
All right. Well, then take me through the process. Take me through the process of like somebody that dips down with grip strength. You throw the dynamometer on them and they're like 10 to 20 pounds of force less. What are you doing with
them? So for my affiliate this past year, we met as a staff every day, kind of have what we called a medical meeting. And we would kind of set the tone for the day. We'd go over different players either on the injury report that were unable completely, guys that we're kind of monitoring for something or the other. Me and my strength coach would probably bring up, hey, we have X player, his grip strength was down. We would kind of try to cross-reference with other things that we might have as far as like his acute chronic workload, his pitch count from the night before, maybe his usage, right? Like if we're talking like cutters versus sliders versus fastballs, right? Like what was his usage and how did that deviate from his norm as well? So pitchers or baseball players in general are abnormally normal. So trying to put them on like in a box is not necessarily going to be the most effective strategy for managing their health over time. So a lot of our conversations are about, hey, this popped up. What do you guys think? Talking with the pitching staff and kind of picking their brain about what they think, why that might be, or how we can kind of adjust his workload moving forward into the week, and definitely planning out a checkpoint of like, hey, let me get you on the table. Let me see where your range of motion is sitting at. Let me see where your tissue quality is sitting at, and kind of mapping out his week or the next 2 weeks and how we can kind of mitigate his either cuff fatigue, forearm fatigue, whatever is kind of the root of the cause there.
Okay, so you're the one that gets them on the table and starts checking out range of motion and so on?
Yeah, so at affiliate, you'll have one athletic trainer, and then except AAA, we have two full times there. We also have associates, like I referenced my intern from this past year, Tori. We have certified athletic trainers that we have that work with us. We call them our associates, and they really are a key part of our care team. So we're responsible for kind of checking them out from day to day, right? Like I'd say if I have a roster of 30 guys, 25 guys probably rotate through my room every single day. There's that like 5 guys that maybe come in once a week or every 2 weeks that maybe just utilize the other ways of keeping themselves healthy, which is also a great skill to have. But we're checking it with them in different ways. So we created a culture here at the Phillies where the training room doesn't mean you're hurt. So basically trying to get guys to prevent these kind of devastating and catastrophic injuries by kind of checking in on them every day. So I could probably tell you where any one of my pitchers is at every single day by throwing program, how they're feeling, what their tissue quality is like, where they're sore at, kind of what our plan is going to be. And I'd take that time to talk with our pitching coach about kind of our plans for the week.
Okay, so I'm kind of curious as to the approach while they're on the table. Like, are you staying localized with wrist, elbow, shoulder, scap? Or are you going all the way through and just doing a joint by joint perspective, kind of a screening assessment, looking for the quality of hip range of motion, mobility, however you want to call it, knee, foot, and so on? Or do you primarily just stay around the shoulder?
So obviously we're always going to look at the body from like a global perspective. I'd say pitchers on like the day-to-day, we're definitely honing in more so on the shoulder range of motion, where their scap's sitting, the tissue quality around that, bicep, pec, kind of getting into all those structures, as well as the forearm, hand, finger, wrist, the whole bit there. But there are definitely a good amount of them that require some form of like a hip check-in or something to assess kind of how their core is firing, how the small muscles around their kind of pelvic girdle are firing, and kind of working with some of that. So I'd say it depends from person to person. I was joking. I took a needling course this past weekend in Cincinnati, and we had the opportunity to take it at FC Cincinnati. So a couple of the soccer athletic trainers were working there, and we're taking the course. So I was kind of talking with them. They're like, "Oh my gosh, it's so funny. Like I can't even imagine working in upper extremity sports some of these days because they just get so used to dealing with the lower." And I was like, I wish I could say that. Wow, I could never do a lower sport or I don't necessarily wish I could say that, but I find it hard to say that would be hard for me to do because we really do see everything. Like, yeah, we see a good bit of shoulder, we see a good bit of elbow, hand, wrist. You're going to see that in your swingers. But at the end of the day, like we have backs, we have ribs, we have calves, we have ankles, we have toes, we have different kinds of hip issues, core issues, right? A lot of obliques, different things like that. Some rib dysfunctions. To name a few. So obviously issues with the face, you get hit in the face, nose, whatever, concussions, teeth issues, we got it all. So anything can really happen on any given day. So I wouldn't just limit us to kind of being proficient at the shoulder.
Well, that's good to hear. And it's obviously, it wouldn't be surprising to hear that either. But there was a time early on, I would say 80s, 90s, and even early 2000s, where it was much more localized without considering the whole integrative chain as a whole body, but just more or less, let's just put the telephoto lens on the area of complaint, and we're just going to beat the living hell out of that with bands and tissue and a whole bunch of approaches. These days, of course, you've I would say grown up or been introduced to the more integrative approach, which is very refreshing to hear. And you don't have to unlearn all of the dogma of the past, I guess you'd say. But with that, there must be some really cool anecdotal kind of experiences, stories that you're working with this one player. It's got this nagging, recurring issue, and you hunt it down to the point where it actually is not in the area of complaint, but it's stemming from how they're producing force over here in this kind of hidden place that nobody was looking. And as soon as you get that to come into play and start producing it, boom, that symptom is diminished or completely gone. Any experiences like that?
Yeah, I mean, we'll get a ton of different things that pop up like that. A couple that come to mind is in baseball, you get a lot of like fingernail issues, a lot of like fingernail, like nails breaking, nails, blood blistering, things like that. So I had one player this year, a lot of it, we were kind of thinking it was more so I think it was his slider grip and like how his finger was rubbing the seam that was causing a little bit of his discomfort. But what we realized is kind of how he was putting himself on the rubber was putting him in a situation where he maybe had to grip the ball a little bit harder, or something like that. So we kind of went up the chain with that, and looked more so at his like shoulder range of motion, his ability to cross his body, back hip rotation, his ability to kind of load his glute, as well as like some dorsiflexion. We also had a pitcher who was struggling a little bit with command. And we went back in some of his video. That's like the benefit here too, right? We have like a ton of access to video and things like that. And this pitcher was struggling with command. And what we realized is whenever he came off his back heel, he was kind of missing the zone. So how could we keep his dorsiflexion as well as his glute activation in a place that could keep him being able to kind of transfer force down the mound? So different things, little small changes can go a big way.
And what are the things the great answer, by the way, Meaghan, what are some of the things within your work that you strive to improve upon? I won't say that you struggle with, but what are some of the challenges that you face in your role with the Phillies?
I think obviously like baseball, I always say that it's a lifestyle more than it really is a job at this level. So obviously we play 130 games a year. There's a 6 8 week camp ahead of that, spring training, where you're kind of working these 10 12 hour games, right? You kind of get in these routines even yourself of like, I'm going to do this from this hour to this hour. Then players are going to start to come in. We're going to work from this time to this time on some treatments. We're going to go outside. We're going to cover the field. And I think you can get pretty like routine and kind of, um, routine about what you're doing. And I think sometimes you can lose the forest with the trees if you don't kind of step back sometimes. So I think just with the grind of the season, it's easy to kind of get in some of those bad habits where maybe you get kind of too tunnel vision on some certain body part or certain complaint, and you're not necessarily like thinking of on the grand scheme of things.
And what comes easy to you?
I mean, I'm a manual therapist. I feel like by trade, I'm really a manual skill person. I like to get my hands. I like to feel the tissue quality. I like to kind of see where their joints are sitting at. I feel like I do a good job with that part of my practice. So I'm definitely a manual therapist. I think we do a good job with the Phillies here, though, kind of being both, right? Like you can't do a bunch of soft tissue and expect a player to be able to use the new range of motions that you're giving them with that, or expect them to kind of fix your problems. Very few times in my practice will I do any kind of manual work, whether that be a joint mob, whether that be soft tissue treatment or something like that, and not kind of reinforce that with some form of like isometric exercise, some form of stability exercise or something like that. So I think you really got to keep on your P's and Q's all the time. I think that's what baseball does. Is I'm around some of the greatest minds of all time. I know at my affiliate, it's limited as far as the number of athletic trainers, but in spring training, there's 10, 12 of us in a room, bouncing ideas off each other, seeing how somebody treats a blister, seeing how somebody maybe does a certain PNF exercise for the calf. Maybe we're looking at how someone's doing more of like a MAT style activation of like the hip or something like that. So another shoulder exercise, because obviously you can wear those out or kind of get in your routines of like the 2 3 4 that you kind of go to. So being around different minds is also one of the best things I like. I know I'm helping kind of run some interviews for some of our associate roles right now. And that's kind of what a lot of the people that are kind of at high schools or smaller colleges are like, yeah, I feel like I'm isolated here and I don't really have people to bounce ideas off. It's like, if I have a case and I'm stumped on it, I'm calling the AAA athletic trainer. I'm saying, hey, I got this. Like, you got anything for me? Or maybe this guy spent a lot of time in rehab and I'm calling down to the physical therapist down in rehab and saying, hey, was he dealing with this there? Is there anything that you've used that worked in the past? So, and always looking at the player too, right? Like these guys are baseball players, but they're human beings, right? Like they have a lot going on outside the field, a lot of pressure from different things. Like I know we talked about the Dominican Republic a little bit. I've spent a good amount of my off seasons down there. I love the Dominican Republic. I love all those guys, and those guys come from very different backgrounds, right? Everyone in baseball, right? Guys from Venezuela, Cuba, guys from Colombia. We have a bunch of players from Australia. We have like a huge group of Australian players, Mexico as well, Taiwan. I've had the opportunity to have 2 Taiwanese players in the past year, and I use their translators to learn a little Mandarin too. But whatever you can do to kind of make these guys feel more comfortable, kind of gain their trust that way, that's really going to be your bread and butter. That's going to how you're going to have some success. You could be the best athletic trainer in the world, and none of that really matters if you can't connect with the player or make them trust you.
Right on, right on. Okay, so your tools, your greatest tools are your hands, and with those, they've learned a whole bunch of techniques from the typical base understanding of soft tissue, like sports massage, Swedish deep tissue, and so on. But you mentioned MAT, PNF. There's a whole bunch of different modalities and approaches to manual work. Which ones do you really enjoy? If there are specific ones, which ones did have blown you away, if any? What are the ones that are in your toolbox, so to speak?
Yeah, I think I've taken a bunch of different coursework, and even if I haven't taken the courses, I've learned a lot of different kind of approaches or styles from different people that I've worked with. I wouldn't say like I'm a MAT therapist or I am a PRI therapist. I'm not kind of falling in one realm or the other. I definitely like take a little bit from each thing and kind of use it whenever it's needed. This off season, I took dry needling through Suction and Function, Sue Falzone's education company, which I would love to meet her.
Sue's great.
She's on my I'm quoted saying that I would be more nervous meeting Sue Falzone than any major league player ever.
Uh-huh.
She is the epitome. I mean, obviously her background being the first female athletic trainer in any of the major 4 sports, she's just an absolute stud. So would love to meet her someday. She's incredible. Therapist, athletic trainer, and just educator in general. So she's amazing.
Well, you're not that far from Houston. You could just take a little bit of a drive.
So I took dry needling. I really liked that. I think that's going to be a really good tool in my toolbox. Not going to say I'm going to go and needle every single player we have in this camp, but essentially just having in your back pocket for when you kind of need that pain control or kind of assessing trigger points and that stuff. I took a Meagghan course as well. Meagghan, it's like mobilization with movement. I really like some of that like upper thoracic stuff, some things with the finger and the wrist as well. So I'll probably keep those in my toolbox. I took the MAT trunk course this past off season. I had been doing it for a while. We learned from our major league head athletic trainer, Paul Bukai. He's a huge MAT guy, and he's been showing us a lot with that. I took Graston a couple of years ago. I definitely use a lot of ISCM in my toolbox as well. I love cupping as well, like dynamic cupping, like putting cups somewhere and having them do movement associated with it. I think that really gets you where you need to go as far as like fascial lines are concerned. So I think all of it's really just like a piece of the puzzle, like seeing how the body's moving and how the tissue's kind of adjusting to the workload and adapting to the stresses put on it. So really it's just kind of using everything you got and then backing it up with exercise.
Yeah, and do you have something in your head that is somewhat more protocol centric when it comes to all of the tools you just mentioned, or is it something that is more, I won't use the word instinctive, but or intuitive, but just letting your hands guide you into what the athlete needs?
Yeah, I'd say it varies day to day and whoever I have on the table. I wouldn't say I kind of work one spectrum to the other. Definitely like run through if I'm talking like a pitcher, if I'm getting a pitcher on a table, like day after they threw off a mound, then I'm kind of ranging them through at the shoulder and kind of assessing the tissue quality there. And from that kind of dictates my plan for the rest of the day. Like what's their expected job for that day, right? They're probably just throwing nice and light. Are they expected to play in a game again or in the next day or so? Like that's going to affect the time of your treatment, how aggressive your treatments are. So I think it really depends on the person and kind of what the player's expected workload is.
And how much traveling is involved with your position?
Yeah, so in the minor leagues, you travel a 6-day road series. So essentially, like your 6 games home, you have Monday off day. You play Tuesday to Sunday. And then you travel. Sometimes you travel on the off day, sometimes not. Depends how far you're going. Sometimes you can be home for 2 weeks. Sometimes you can be on the road for 2 weeks. But essentially, you go to your affiliate. Ours are in northeastern kind of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia area. And so I'll kind of travel out of there like 5 months a year. The other times, the off season, you can kind of be wherever you want to live. And then there's some off season responsibilities as far as like camps are concerned. So I worked a camp in the fall down here in Clearwater. I'm working another camp right now. Then we'll kind of lead into spring training. But we had the new minor league CBA required us to have a dead period from November 17th to January 2nd. So we weren't allowed to have any camps during that time. So you definitely have like 6 or 8 weeks where you're definitely not working in person. You're kind of working on your Con Ed, you're doing that sort of thing, communicating with other coaches, checking with the players to make sure they're still doing well and they don't need anything from you. As in line with the NBA.
And where do you see yourself going? I mean, I know you're happy where you are. So for your bosses listening or whatever, you're going to stay right there. But in terms of like goals, because everyone likes to have them, and where do you see yourself being? Do you want to stay with baseball and be in the big show up at Fenway? I'm not going to say Philly. I'm going to say Fenway because you got to go home sometime. But definitely not the Shea Stadium. All right, we'll just make an agreement on that. But or do you want to just kind of, hey, if the MLS calls you up, or the NFL or NBA, are you gearing up for all sports or what?
I never really saw myself here. So it's always a really interesting question whenever I'm asked like what my end goal is. And I think every year, if you ask me, it'd probably be a little bit different. When I first got hired, they asked me in my interview if my goal was to be in the major leagues, and I said no. And not in the sense that I didn't think I'd ever want to go, but I wasn't naive in the sense that I feel like that's the answer everybody gives, and I had no idea what that meant. So I wasn't going to be like, yeah, I want to do something that I have no idea what it is. So I basically just spent the first couple of years of my minor league career, which I'm still currently in too, but the first like 1 or 2 years, just happy to make an impact wherever the organization saw me. As I've kind of moved up, just luck and opportunity kind of converging with hard work. Bouncing around necessarily isn't the most common, and I've bounced around every year. Just through opportunities that the organization has provided me. And I've moved up with a lot of the players that I started with. So that's been extremely rewarding. So that's kind of been my driver. And in that process, I realized like I want to continue to move up and continue to impact the organization as much as I can. Ideally, I would love to be in the major league level in the next 5 years, ideally. I know like with the minor leagues, it varies for people from person to person, but essentially anywhere from like 7 to 10 years is like the average minor league athletic trainer. I would say like is kind of down here in the trenches before they might get a major league opportunity, just building experience and kind of building those reps. So I would say confidently now that my end goal is to be in the major leagues in baseball.
Oh, right on.
I'm
And
not
what about, well, but not what? What was that?
I'm not necessarily like interested in pursuing other sports right now. I'm really just kind of loving baseball and loving where I'm at. So not necessarily ever been interested in going somewhere else in the past 5 years.
That's a good place to be then. If you're happy where you are, that's wonderful. What about education? Because now you can get a DAT, Doctor of Athletic Training. Considering that at all?
Yeah, I've thought about it. I'll like in the back of my head, I thought maybe I'd ever want to like teach an athletic training program eventually. And like that would be more like a PhD or a DAT or an EDD, depending. But right now I'm kind of just working to pay off student loans and not really looking to take on any more debt at this point. And I think like whenever, if it ever presented itself and it was the right opportunity, I wouldn't say no, but I wouldn't say I'm like actively pursuing another degree at this time.
Oh, that's fine. So if we've got emerging athletic trainers coming out of school, finishing up their masters, or for that matter, undergrad, and they want to just keep an eye on you, follow you on social media or wherever, do you do that? Do you have enough time in your day? I don't see any dogs or cats roaming around. I have a feeling you don't
No,
have any pets, but you probably have a
no.
phone and you throw some posts up every now and then. Can people follow you?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn. I share some stuff on there here and there. Definitely not like a public social media person as far as like posts and kind of my day to day. But LinkedIn, they can definitely find me on LinkedIn, Meaghan Flaherty. You'll find me there.
Right on. Well, I'll put that in the description of the podcast. Meaghan, this has been a treat. This really has. You gave me some really great answers, great insight, and I'm super excited just for you and your passion, because it obviously it comes through quite easily. And I just want to thank you for coming on and sharing that with me and the listeners.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Hopefully I didn't ramble too bad.
That brings this episode of Zealous to a close. Thank you, Meagan, and the Phillies organization for giving us a little bit of your time. Meanwhile, remember to register for those workshops coming up either on the East Coast, in Massachusetts, or on the West Coast, Capitola, California. You can go to rockysnyder.com. In the meantime, have yourself a great week, and we will see you soon.